this video, we will do a quick recap of components of the performance evaluation system for Ingenuity Prep staff. Let's start with structure of the evaluation system. The system is built on the same two components for everyone: goals and competencies. Together, these combine to determine your final score. Think of it this way. Goals represent the what, the outcomes you're working toward, and competencies represent the how, the way you approach and accomplish work. Both matter, and together they make up your complete evaluation. For non-instructional staff, shown here, the evaluation is made up of three components: goal attainment, core competency assessment, both leading to the final score and summary reflections that bring those things together. For leaders, the evaluation system is built on the same foundation: goals and competencies that combine to determine a final score. Goals still represent the what, and competencies still represent the how. The one difference is that for leaders, competencies come in two parts. The first is the same 6 core competencies from the non-instructional structure, and the second is a set of leadership competencies, which focus specifically on leading people and teams. Collectively, the leader evaluation is made up of 4 components: goal attainment, core competency assessment, leadership competency assessment, and the final score and summary reflections that bring everything together. For teachers, the evaluation system is built on the same foundation as everyone else: goals and competencies that combine to determine a final score. Goals still represent the what, and competencies still represent the how. Teachers also have 2 kinds of competencies. The first is the same 6 core competencies that every staff member is held to. The second is the teaching strategies framework, which evaluates classroom practice. Each of these components combine to determine a final score. Let's dig in a bit deeper into each component, starting with goals. Goals represent the most important what's that staff do in their role to make an impact. All leaders and non-instructional staff have 3 performance and 1 learning and development goal. Performance goals should first be tied to a team or academy goal, where this makes sense to do so. And where that doesn't make sense, they should be tied to a key responsibility of that staff member's role. Learning and development goals must be tied to an indicator from one of the core or leadership competencies. Goals are scored using a 1 to 5 scale that does not include a 3. You may be asking yourself, why is there no rating of 3 on the goal evaluation scale? The goal rating scale was intentionally designed to create clearer differentiation between almost meeting versus meeting an individual goal by assigning a greater point value, 4 out of 5 points, for goals that are met versus almost met at 2 out of 5 points. Teachers also set goals as part of the evaluation process. Staff in teaching roles have 3 goals: 2 performance goals and 1 learning and development goal. The 2 performance goals are set by academy principals and are aligned to student outcome assessments for each teaching role. Principals also select fall and spring benchmarks on those assessments, and those benchmarks are what determine a teacher's fall and spring evaluation scores. Teaching roles have learning and development goals as well. Learning and development goals are set collaboratively between teachers and their manager and should be tied to either an indicator from the core competencies rubric or an indicator from the teaching strategies framework. Similar to leaders and non-instructional staff, goals are scored on a 1 to 5 scale with no 3. Now let's talk about competencies more deeply. Competencies are the second major component of the evaluation system. They assess how work gets done. All staff will be rated on these 6 core competencies. They apply to everyone, regardless of role, and have been designed to reflect what high-quality, mission-aligned work at IP looks like. They are intentionally cross-functional and role-agnostic, creating clarity and consistency across the organization. Staff and leader roles will also be rated on these 3 leadership competencies. These apply only to leaders and have been designed to reflect what high-quality, mission-aligned leadership at IP looks like. They are also intentionally cross-functional and role-agnostic and intended to create consistency and clarity across leadership roles within the organization. Staff in teaching roles will also be rated on the Teaching Strategies Framework, which is specific to classroom practice. The framework is organized into 4 teaching competencies, each anchored by an essential question. Each competency is scored on a 1 to 5 scale based on the observation trends over the course of the time period leading up to the evaluation window. Now that you've seen the components of the evaluation system, let's look at how they're weighted to determine a final score. For non-instructional staff, the final score is made up of a goal score and a competency score. Goals are worth 40% of the final score, and core competencies are worth 60% of the final score. Since non-instructional staff have 4 goals and are scored on 6 competencies, each individual goal and each individual core competency is worth 10% of their overall score. Here you can see an example of how this works in practice. In this sample, this sample staff member has scored a 4 on each of their goals, giving them a total of 16 points toward their goal attainment score of the 20 available points, giving them a percentage score of 80%. A similar exercise happens in core competencies. In this case, they have scored 3 on all of their core competencies, giving them a total of 18 points of the 30 available points in that section, which equates to a percentage score of 60%. Now that we have percentage scores for each of the components, we need to apply the weighting to arrive at our final score. Once we weight the section-based percentage scores by the weights, 40% for goals and 60% for core competencies, we arrive at the weighted percentages for each of these sections. Once we add them together, we arrive at a final score. Each spring, that final score will be translated into IP's current salary increase bands. Now let's look at how weighting works for leaders. Just like non-instructional staff, a leader's final score is made up of a goal and competency scores. Goals are worth 40%, the same as non-instructional staff members. Competencies as a whole are also still worth 60%. The difference is that how that 60% is divided. For leaders, core competencies are worth 30% and leadership competencies are worth 30%. Here's what that actually means in practice. Because there are 6 core competencies but only 3 leadership competencies, each leadership competency is weighted more heavily, at 10% each, as opposed to each core competency, which is worth 5% each. This is intentional. A leader's ability to drive outcomes through others is what impacts the school the most, so it carries the greater weight in the evaluation system. Here is the same kind of example for how this plays out, but this time for a leader. The structure works exactly the same way with one additional section. You'll see 3 scored sections here instead of 2: goals, core competencies, and leadership competencies. Each section produces its own score, and those scores are then weighted: 40% for goals, 30% for core competencies, and 30% for leadership competencies, added to form the final score shown here. Lastly, let's look at how the weighting works for a teacher. Just like other staff members, teachers' final scores are made up of goal and competency scores. In this case, goals are worth 30%, with each of their 3 goals being worth 10%, which is the same per goal value as every other IP staff member. Core competencies are worth 30% for teachers, and the Teaching Strategies Framework is worth 40%. Each TSF core competency carries more weight than each core competency. This is intentional. A teacher's primary responsibility is effective classroom practice that drives strong student outcomes, and that is what impacts the school the most. Here is the same kind of example, this time for a teacher. The structure works exactly the same as leaders, just with a slightly different component weighting. You still see the 3 scored sections: goals, core competencies, and TSF competencies. And then you see how these scores are then weighted: 30% for goals, 30% for core competencies, and 40% for leadership competencies. Final percentage scores will be translated into one of these 4 bands to determine annual compensation increases each spring.